There was once a boy named Eli. He didn't come into the world broken or bitter. He was born curious, bright-eyed, full of wonder, the kind of child who asked endless questions and dreamed in vivid colors. But the world, as it often does, didn't know what to do with a soul like his, not in the way he needed. His father would stumble home long after dark, voice raised, anger spilling out like poison. His mother would retreat into silence, a ghost haunting her own life. Eli learned to move quietly, memorizing which floorboards creaked, like a soldier studying a minefield. Dinner became a battleground, plates clinking, words cutting deeper than knives. No one ever apologized. No one ever acknowledged the chaos. But what broke Eli wasn't just the violence. It was the pretending, the smiles in public, the everything's fine that everyone knew was a lie. The gaslighting of reality itself, that's the real poison. Because when you tell a child their pain isn't real, they stop trusting their own perception of the world. And once that happens, the damage spreads inward. The human mind can endure a lot, but it has limits. Trauma doesn't just sit in memory, it sinks into the body. It rewires nerves, distorts perception, teaches the heart to brace for impact even in moments of calm. It whispers lies. You're not safe. You're not worthy. You're not real. And as that child grows, those lies grow too, wearing new faces. Eli grew up clever, charming even. He became the funny one, the adaptable one, the kind of man who could read a room instantly and become whoever people wanted him to be. But behind the mask, he was hollow, like a burned-out house, walls still upright, but everything inside turned to ash. That's what unhealed trauma does. It splits a person into two, the self they show and the self that's silently drowning. Carl Jung once said, "The greatest tragedy of a family is the unlived lives of the parents." Eli carried that tragedy like inheritance, not through genes, but through silence, through the emotional neglect passed down like heirlooms no one asked for. His unraveling didn't come all at once. It started with the sleepless nights, the constant sense that something was wrong even when life looked normal. Then came the paranoia, the flashes of rage, the crushing self-doubt. He couldn't trust others. Eventually, he couldn't even trust himself. Relationships became war zones, full of closeness and collapse. He'd push people away, then beg them not to leave. Love became a battlefield where he was both the fighter and the one setting the traps. Once he tried therapy, told the therapist he couldn't feel anything anymore, that his dreams were like static, that sometimes he'd stare into a mirror and feel nothing for the man staring back. They called it anxiety, depression, but the truth was deeper. The real sickness was silence, because pain ignored doesn't die. It waits, it festers, it becomes shape-shifting, showing up years later as addiction, burnout, rage, or the quiet withdrawal of someone who used to shine. Eli started talking to himself, not absent-minded muttering, full conversations, arguments, pleas. He'd pass mirrors without recognizing the reflection. He carried a notebook everywhere, filling it with cryptic sentences no one else could understand. His friends said he'd changed, but that wasn't quite true. He'd just grown too tired to hide. Because madness, contrary to what people think, isn't chaos, it's surrender. It's the mind finally saying, I can't hold this anymore. After a lifetime of pretending, Eli's psyche began to crack. The human mind isn't a machine. It's a delicate web of memory, emotion, and meaning. When too many threads are soaked in pain, they start to fray. He began seeing messages everywhere, patterns in the random. He thought the universe was speaking directly to him. A commercial on the radio, a flicker of light, a stranger's glance, everything became a sign. But what was really happening wasn't magic or madness. It was memory resurfacing. It was trauma, demanding to be heard. His mind, desperate for order, began creating meaning out of chaos. It was trying to weave logic through the noise, to give shape to what had never been resolved. That's the cruel genius of unhealed trauma. It doesn't rest, it doesn't fade, it transforms. It hides behind anxiety, disguises itself as anger, sometimes even masquerades as revelation. But beneath it all is the same voice, a child crying out, "Please see me, save me, help me." But by the time the world noticed, it was already too late. Because the world doesn't understand madness. It fears it. It turns it into headlines, cautionary tales, statistics. And Eli, like so many others, became one more story people whisper about, never understanding. He didn't break because he was weak. He broke because he held too much for too long. Some called it insanity. But Jung had another name, individuation, the process of becoming whole by confronting the chaos within. Yet for someone like Eli, it didn't feel like enlightenment. It felt like drowning, like being dragged into an ancient ocean of memory and shadow that spoke not in words, but in symbols, whispers, and screams that only he could hear. Because losing your mind isn't a moment. It's a slow unraveling, a quiet fracture that spreads like a crack across glass. From the outside, people say, he just snapped, but they never saw the years before. The silent nights, the empty rooms, the loneliness that no one else was awake to witness. When you bury your past, you don't destroy it, you replicate it. Unhealed trauma becomes a haunting, not a memory, but a presence. And ghosts don't rest. They linger. They echo. Eli wasn't haunted by events. He was haunted by himself, by every version of him that was ignored, dismissed, or silenced. Every moment he stayed quiet as a child now screamed inside his adult skin. That's the place where sanity begins to blur. In psychology, they call it the false self, the version of you built to survive when survival is all you have. The false self wears masks, tells people what they want to hear, smiles when it's breaking. It convinces the world everything's fine until one day, the lie becomes too heavy. The mask cracks, the performance collapses, and what's left beneath is the shadow, the grief you buried, the rage you disowned, the voice that whispers, you were never loved the way you needed to be. That's what losing your mind really is. Not illness, not evil, not chaos. It's protest. It's the soul rebelling against silence. It's the mind's final scream for truth after years of pretending. Madness is not always destruction. Sometimes it's exposure. Because when everything collapses, when the lies fall, when the masks shatter, when meaning dissolves, you're left with the only thing that can rebuild you, the truth. And for Eli, that truth was this. He was abused. He was neglected. He was never seen for who he truly was. For years, he told himself it didn't matter. But it did. It always did. Jung believed that healing begins the moment the unconscious is brought into the light, when you stop running from the darkness and dare to look straight at it. But that's the hardest part, because facing your past means reopening the wounds you swore were gone. Beneath the numbness, beneath the madness, lies something even more terrifying. Vulnerability. To step into your shadow, you must soften. You must grieve. And grief in its rawest form feels like dying. Eli began to write, not to make sense of it all, not even to heal, but simply to survive it. His notebook became a battlefield of ink and emotion, chaotic scrawls, fragmented drawings, sometimes a single sentence repeated over and over again. I didn't deserve this. That line changed everything, not because it gave him peace, but because it gave him permission. Permission to feel what he'd buried, to rage, to ache, to finally be human again. And somewhere in that flood of pain, something fragile stirred. Hope. Healing, he learned, doesn't start with motivation or mantras. It begins with truth, and truth is born in pain. This time, when he returned to therapy, he didn't perform. He didn't try to sound insightful or enlightened. He just cried. For the child who had to grow up too soon, for the man who never felt safe inside his own skin, for the madness that wasn't madness at all, just a message he had ignored for too long. He wasn't fixed, but he wasn't lost anymore either. He began to understand. Madness was never his enemy. It was communication, the psyche's desperate attempt to be heard. And when he finally stopped fighting it, when he opened the door to the parts of himself he had locked away, they didn't destroy him. They thanked him, because for the first time, he was listening. If you've ever felt like you're coming apart, if the world feels too loud, too cruel, too much, know this. You're not broken, you're buried. Healing isn't becoming someone new. It's remembering who you were before pain convinced you to forget. Where do you begin? Start with silence. Not the hollow silence of shutting down, but the sacred stillness of paying attention. Write, scream, walk, cry, but do it with awareness, without shame. Seek wisdom that doesn't numb you, but awakens you. Read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Owning Your Own Shadow by Robert A. Johnson. The Drama of the Gifted Child by Alice Miller. Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. These aren't just books, they're mirrors. They won't give you answers, but they'll teach you how to ask the questions that matter. And most of all, don't heal to become flawless. Heal so you can become whole. So you can look into a mirror and recognize the soul looking back. Because the world doesn't need more masks. It needs more survivors. People who've walked through their shadows and returned with light.